Welcome to Alchemy Uncensored, a podcast presented by Alchemy Search, a team of professional financial and tax recruiters. Our podcast is dedicated to providing valuable insights into the financial and tax sector of the UAE by discussing the challenges and opportunities faced by employers and job seekers. Alchemy Uncensored is the perfect podcast for those looking to gain a competitive edge in the finance, accounting and tax industry of the UAE. Stay informed on the latest job market trends, developments and conversations to stay ahead of the game. Tune into our podcast to be part of this insightful conversation. Hello, fellow alchemists. Thank you for listening to the podcast thus far. 2024, big year ahead. The one favor I would ask, if you can, if you're enjoying what you're listening to, is to press the follow and subscribe button on whatever media platform you listen to us, as it helps us grow our network and grow the podcast. So thank you and enjoy the podcast today.
In today's episode of our tax series podcast, I'm excited to welcome and chat with Stuart Ramsay. Stuart has nearly 16 years of experience working in tax and has spent the last 10 of those years in the UAE. Currently, he is a director and the head of tax for the Debizzle Group. Formed as EMPG in 2020, the Debizzle Group is the largest online classifieds player in emerging markets, operating 4 bespoke brands, Debizzle and Beirut in the UAE and wider MENA region, as well as Zameen.com and OLX in Pakistan. Prior to his current role, Stuart spent 7 years as Group Tax Manager for DP World, a globally integrated ports, terminals, marine services, logistics and technology provider, and he was based at their head office in Dubai. Prior to his role at DP World, Stuart was an M&A tax manager at PwC, having joined the Big Four firm as a graduate in 2008 and spending the early part of his career in the UK, where he qualified as a chartered accountant before relocating to Dubai in 2014. Hi Stuart, welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited to have you on today. So I know you've been in your role for a year and a half, but I just want to say congratulations. You are the head of tax at Debizzle Group, which is a pretty big deal.
Thank you very much, Pooja. Thanks for having me. I love what you've done with the place.
Thanks.
Really, it's a pleasure to be here and to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no worries. So I'm really excited about today's podcast because what I really want listeners to go away with is having some insight about working in-house in a tax role. We've heard from consultants about, life on that side of the desk, but I want to now hear life on the other side of the desk when you are in an in-house tax role. And I think you have amazing experience, especially in the UAE. You've worked 7 years at DP World and now a year and a half at Debizzle. So yeah, I think that's the agenda for today, giving some insights into an in-house role and tips for any candidates who are thinking of moving from consultancy to industry.
Yeah, it sounds good to me. I'm happy to have a chat.
So as many tax professionals, you started your career in a Big Four or a consultancy. So you started at PwC in Glasgow?
In Glasgow, yep.
Okay.
That was 2008.
Wow, long time ago.
It feels like a short time ago, but it is a long time ago. Or it feels like a short time ago, but honestly, it's crazy to think that I've been in UAE for 10 years.
Yeah.
And then there was so many years before that working at PwC in the UK. I don't know where the time's gone.
Time goes
I don't
fast.
feel that old.
Shall we disclose your age?
No.
Let's not do that. So you started at PwC in 2008. You moved across with PwC to Dubai in 2014, and you were in the M&A tax team. So what made you think moving to Dubai in 2014 to do tax in a country where there's no tax would be a good idea at that point in your career?
It was kind of a perfect storm, I think. There was, I'd done 7 or so years in the UK. Things felt a little bit stagnant for me, the same office, the same day-to-day routine. Not that I wasn't challenged, but I just felt like I really wanted to see something different. And it was, for me, that was moving somewhere, whether that be London or US, Australia. It could have been any of those places.
Okay.
I just wanted to change things up. Maybe get away from the Scottish weather a little bit, although I miss it now.
Really?
But, yeah, of course. But, that was what I needed. And at the time, actually PwC UK owned the firm in the Middle East and was kind of developing the firm in the Middle East. And so there was a lot of talk and chat about possible roles in the Middle East to build up the team. And I decided to come out here on holiday, meet a few of the partners and just see how they felt about things. And those meetings went well. And I came back to Scotland. I was on the plane. I remember flying home thinking, I enjoyed my holiday. I enjoyed the city. I enjoyed the country. I think I came and I ran a half marathon in Abu Dhabi on my holiday. And I just
That's
had
crazy.
it was a bit crazy. And the night before I did not prepare well at all. Like I really, winged it for this race. And then I just had such a good experience doing that and doing other things in the country that I was flying home just thinking, I want to come back.
Amazing.
And I think 3.5 months later, I moved out here.
Wow.
It took a few months.
10 years later, you're still here.
Exactly. And when you come out here, I think everyone comes out here and they say, it's 3 years or 2 years and I'll just taste it and then I'll go back to my home country. But many of us, that doesn't work out. And
you get locked in to the luxuries that Dubai offer you or UAE offer you.
Yeah, not paying tax and the luxuries that you enjoy and the lifestyle and the weather.
Yeah.
And various benefits of the city. It's clean and it's low crime and, I think we all quite enjoy being expats out here.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, great. So, you started your career in the UAE at PwC. How long did you spend at PwC before you started exploring options, industry options? And at that point, were there many industry roles going? Because we didn't have tax here back then, and DP World is a large organization with a tax team. So how did that come about? Yeah, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. There was only really a tax team or a tax person in-house in any of the big multinationals out here, if they were multinationals. The local groups didn't have a tax person. The kind of UAE or even GCC only businesses didn't have a tax person really. Any kind of non-UAE tax was dealt with by finance people. But the big multinationals had tax teams. And you're right, when you thought about who were they were the sovereign wealth funds, they were DP World, they were Emirates, and they were, a few others that had interests maybe starting in the UAE, but had spread into India, Pakistan, Egypt, and maybe further afield than that. So those were the only real options. So the tax rolls 10 years ago were kind of few and far between. And I have to say, I'm not sure I was looking to move in-house. I'd spent 18 months working in M&A. Okay. And as you know, M&A tax, M&A anything is quite intensive work, especially in the Big Four. So, there was an intensity about it. There was long hours, of course. I don't look back and feel any regret about those long hours. They were a great experience and it was hard work and it was a great team. But I think, the DP World role kind of came to me rather than me finding it. Oh, wow. And I was really just kind of, I knew this is, I kind of referred to it as one of the crown jewels of the Dubai government. It's DP World and it's Emirates, right? And they both have similar sizes of business. And I just thought I can't really, let this go past me. So I met with them. I had like a 3/4 day of interviews with them. Really? And it just all clicked. And Do you remember the interview process for that role? Yeah, I mean, I remember going in around 9:15 in the morning and leaving around 2:30. Okay. Was it just one day of interviews? Yeah, one day. I think I met maybe 8, 9 people. Okay. And when I look back, that should have been a very daunting experience. But it's just like today. We just have a chat. Yeah. You chat about what you've done. You chat about what you want to do. And that seems to have worked for me at interviews. And I also, if I jump forward in time to the Debizzle move,
I had similar interviews, with the CEO and the CFO, and I just approached them as having a good chat. Obviously you want to present yourself well and your experience well, but just keep a calmness and have a nice chat. Be a likable person.
Yeah.
If you're not already. And usually that works in interviews.
Yeah. No, I think that's really good advice. When any candidate goes for an interview, it's you have candidates with similar profiles, but the candidate that gets the job in the end is the person who clicks with the interviewer or the different stakeholders internally that they meet in an interview process.
Yep.
You have to be likable, and that the interviewer has to see you working well with them. So definitely you are a very likable person. So
I think there's also like a level of confidence that's just right. And I know that sounds very daunting, but if you're overconfident, it can come off quite badly in an interview situation if you act like you know everything. Yeah. But if you're very, very shy and very, very quiet, then also obviously that doesn't look so good either. So there's just finding or almost training yourself to have that satisfactory level of confidence is quite useful.
100% agree. Okay, so how does your role differ, as a tax manager at DP World, a large organization, presence all across the world, over 100,000 employees. How does that role differ to your current role? Of course, now you are responsible for tax for Debizzle Group, so the number one man in charge of tax. So how does that role differ and, the day-to-day work that you're involved in?
So in terms of team, I came into Debizzle Group as tax person number one. So really I was on my own at the start.
Okay.
A lot of the tax work to date had been very capably dealt with by the finance team, but obviously their resources were becoming more and more stretched, and they decided they needed to actually build a tax team to address the growing business. And in hindsight, that was a challenge. I was surrounded by a tax team in DP World. We had 5 of us. I think now that I've left, the business has continued to grow and they have 7 or 8. But we had 5 of us when I was there, and that gives you a nice safety net. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to deliver everything yourself. You can share it and you can collaborate, and you have the support of a boss who's kind of got your back. So then moving to a head of tax role, the kind of buck stops with me on tax. Exactly. I remember in my first few months, I had questions coming to me about things that I considered not to be my specialism. Like very technical aspects of VAT. I never worked in VAT in the Big Four, although you naturally have an understanding of the principles, but moving to a tech company and being asked technical VAT questions in relation to a tech business, that was challenging, and I had to, there was a bit of a imposter syndrome at first, just slightly, where I kind of had to find the answer very quickly. And I remember kind of drawing on my network, of colleagues and friends in Dubai, people who worked in VAT teams in Big Four, and just WhatsApping them. I know you're not charging me for it, but can I ask you this technical question? What's your opinion on it? So there was a bit of that at first, but I think slowly but surely I found my feet. I then recruited to build my team. And that takes the pressure off a little bit. Yeah. And look, I also have a great selection of people around me in management at Debizzle Group. So, my boss is the CFO, and he's always got my back as well. I don't feel any pressure or any kind of feeling of being thrown under the bus on tax issues, even if it's a big deal. I don't feel like I'm ever isolated. It's a team thing. If the business has a tax problem that arises, then it's a business problem. It's not a Stuart problem. Well, it's my problem to fix it, but it's not my fault, And so that's really nice, and I think I felt that at DP World as well.
Okay, good. I think the interesting thing that you just mentioned is that you have your CFO on side. And recently we attended the Gulf Tax Day, and there was a lot of talk around getting management buy-in from your internal stakeholders. So tax is, in some companies, not all, still not, brought forward at the decision-making table when it comes to operations, which is really interesting. Obviously, from a chartered accountancy background, I understand the importance of tax in business. And it's just, even some people say, even finance, it's sometimes not considered straight away when a company's making certain business decisions, which just mind-boggling to me. And the fact that tax also, like heads of tax in some businesses are still trying to get management buy-in into structuring the business a certain way. It's really interesting. So you're in a really fortunate position where you do have your management on board with the importance of tax.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And there's kind of two things there. There's being visible in the business. So it goes back again to having that kind of level of confidence to make sure that the business knows that you as a tax function are there, that you're a business partner of sorts to them, that they can tell you about things that are perhaps considered somewhat confidential. They can invite you to things, to meetings, to discussions about new plans and get your input, and they can come to you essentially whenever with a tax question. And you will be there to support the business. So that's really important. But the other challenge is, of course, there was no tax in the UAE previously, even before VAT. And many business decisions were made without even thinking about tax, because why
They didn't have to.
Didn't have to.
Yeah.
And even, very basic things like moving assets between companies or moving shares or, receiving, paying dividends, simple stuff, giving loans, were done very easily before because there was nothing to think about on the tax side of things. So that now it's become very critical with corporate tax in the UAE for everyone to be aware that a very simple transaction in business could have, if not a tax implication, then at least a tax consideration. And, even if you look at it and conclude there's nothing to worry about, that's still a piece of work, a piece of analysis that's been done, it's been documented, it's put on file, and you might be asked about it later by your auditors. You might sell your business and go through a due diligence and have to explain about what was the tax implications and conclusion on that transaction that happened 2-3 years ago. And you kind of have to be able to do that. So putting yourself out there now, making sure that tax has a seat at the table in all the kind of strategic decisions of the business, I think it's very important. It's a very difficult thing to do. I think all in-house tax people, certainly the ones we spoke to at Gulf Tax Day a few weeks ago, and my kind of network, I'm speaking to them, it's a very challenging thing to do, because on top of your kind of day-to-day management of everything tax-related, you're also trying to kind of change minds and change opinions.
Yeah.
And in another country, in a developed tax system, those minds are already there. You don't have to add that to the repertoire.
I think having that in mind, that's really good for candidates going into interviews, having that understanding that tax might not be fully appreciated when you're going for your interviews or whoever you're speaking to, and because when you're in consultancy, you're asked for the advice, so you do your job, you give the advice to you've been paid to provide your advice on something. But when you are on the other side, you either have the tax knowledge yourself or you do seek assistance from a consultancy on certain pieces of advice. But then what you do with that advice, or how it's interpreted or taken forward internally, that's another challenge. So not all candidates realise that, especially if they are from other parts of the world and it works differently from where they're from. So having that personality, being likeable, being able to build internal stakeholder relationships is really, really key. Putting your argument across, or being able to explain or present the situation, the scenario, is a really key skill or personality trait or soft skill that a candidate should be looking to build or have or present when they are going for an interview?
I think that's a really important thing about moving in-house from being an advisor, is if for example I ask a Big Four to give me a piece of advice and they prepare a report, I have to understand kind of every inch of that report before I talk to CFO or CEO or someone else who's making decisions about things, because inevitably, if I don't understand every inch of that report, or at least be aware of what's in it, the CEO will absolutely pick out the question that I don't know. It was kind of the same for me in PwC. Like, I remember having to learn about something or to write a report for a client, and I always knew that the partner would pick the thing that I didn't know enough about. It's always the case, and it's the same in-house. So if the Big Four write me a report, I have to have gone through it. I have to have challenged them back. I have to kind of just use my own kind of sense of awareness in reading that report as a layperson. And if something doesn't make sense, I have to go back and challenge and get it absolutely crystal clear for myself, because then it will be absolutely crystal clear for the CFO. Yeah. And you know, you do have to have a skill in terms of being able to take something that's maybe quite technical and distill it down and give a gist of the issue and a recommendation to the decision maker. So that's a really important in-house skill that you've touched on. And you know, I remember being in the profession, and you're kind of not aware of that side of being in-house. You do your technical report and you're really proud of it, and maybe you're proud of the number of pages it has, or how fancy the wording that you've used is. But if the client doesn't understand it, or it's not practical in terms of its recommendations, then maybe it's not as good as you thought it was. So being in-house, you kind of, you get that other side of things, and you realise that all of this work that's done on tax advisory, it's really about making practical decisions.
Did you know that tax candidates are more open to going back from industry to consultancy than another field? And I found that really interesting, actually, because usually when people leave consultancy, they never look back, or they never want to go back. But interestingly, a few candidates have made the decision to go back to consultancy because they miss the different technical issues or requests that a variety of different clients and industries come up with, and they can broaden their tax knowledge and advise on different issues, whereas in-house they don't experience or feel the same way, which I found really interesting. So my question to you is, would you ever consider going back into a consultancy role?
We could do a whole podcast on that. I think there's a lot of things to think about. And you know, it's true that when you move in-house, things, I guess, can become a bit stagnant. If it's the same business that's not growing, not going into new markets, not developing new products or new services, and it's doing well, but it's doing the same thing. And so you go through this annual cycle of tax reporting, tax compliance, transfer pricing documentation, maybe occasionally a few questions on invoicing or a loan or a dividend or financing or something. But it can become quite samey, but that's very much driven by the nature of the business that you're in. And if that's not, some people are very happy with that. I've known people through my career who, they want that stability in their job. They want to be very good at it, and they are very good at it, and they don't want it to be changing too much. They want to go home at the end of the day knowing that they've done what they planned to do that day, and they go home to their families, and they're very pleased about that situation. So those roles are suitable for some people, but yeah, if you're someone who's kind of craving new development experiences, the Big Four does provide that, but equally also so does moving to another in-house role, because you can, as soon as you go into any new business, there's that that honeymoon period of the first week where you're getting to know everyone and getting to know the way things work and what the business does in more detail. And then you kind of create a plan for the next, say, 90 days of how are you going to make the tax function better.
Yeah.
If there's not one, how are you going to build one? And if there's already a tax function, what are you going to do? What are you going to bring? And that's exciting. That was exciting when I moved to DeBizzle. I had a kind of blank canvas of how I wanted the tax function to look. And I would implore anyone who moves in-house to kind of almost, to use kind of like finance terminology, you do like a due diligence of the tax layout when you land. Is there compliance failures? Is there transfer pricing documentation in place? Is there a policy for transfer pricing, for managing tax, for tax risks, for tax reporting? Is anything in place? And kind of make that roadmap of what you want to end up with. And that's you got your diary sorted for the first 6 to 9 months in putting all that stuff in place. And that was really exciting to do at DeBizzle.
So the answer, I think, in short, is no. You wouldn't go back to consultancy.
Yeah, that was the question. Everyone who leaves consultancy, they're always like, I'm never going back. I never want to do a timesheet again. I didn't care about the timesheets. That wasn't a big deal for me. I liked consultancy, but I like the certainty of being in-house in terms of what my role is and how much control I have over it. Because obviously in consultancy, if 5 clients come at once and you're their guy and they want a piece of advice or they want you to do something, then you've got 5 projects at the same time, and that can be very difficult to say, no, I can't do it. But in-house, you can plan your life a bit better. So I'm a kind of never say never guy. I might go back to consultancy. It's not something that's on my mind right now, but I've still kept some good relationships. Obviously, I've generated some as an in-house tax person with all the various consultants in the region. I'm like a never say never guy, but at the moment, I'm quite enjoying the in-house side of things.
Good. Okay, so going back to your new role at DeBizzle Group, so you went in and you have hired, or you've hired 1 or 2 people?
Just one so far.
One so far. Okay, so maybe you can talk us through the hiring process and what you were looking for in a candidate when you were looking for somebody to join your team.
I go back to that kind of assessment when I came in. I think I looked at, what the business did and where the kind of tax crunch points were, and then I went out to look for a team that filled those gaps. I mean, those might have been gaps in terms of resource, so we just don't have enough time or people to do a certain thing, or gaps in knowledge, which I admit to having myself. No one can know everything about tax.
Yeah.
So whether that was I needed someone to know more about Saudi tax, or maybe I needed someone to know more about VAT, I kind of went out looking for the specialism first, and then the person hopefully followed. In my case, it did.
Yeah.
So that was the starting point. There's various in-house hurdles that you go through to recruit a new person.
Okay.
So you get sign off from the immediate people above you. You get sign off from HR. You agree a budget. You agree a specification for the role. And then luckily we have a great HR team at DeBizzle who kind of then take that forward and publish the job, and will even do as much as the full vetting of all the applications and whatnot. So we actually have a very good system called Workable, if I'm allowed to say names of things.
Yeah,
it's called Workable.
Yeah.
So this links with LinkedIn. So when the job is posted on LinkedIn and someone applies, then their responses come straight into this software service called Workable.
Okay.
And that kind of gives you a portal to be able to just very easily screen and look at all the different candidates who have shown an interest in your role. So having that was firstly a real time saver. and it's also makes it much more efficient. Because as a candidate, you apply for a role and you don't want to wait 6 weeks or 2 months to hear back, even if you've got an interview. You want the process to move quite quickly. And that's true on both sides. The candidate wants to move quickly, but me as a hiring manager, I also want to fill the role as soon as I can, because inevitably especially with more senior tax people, you will have a notice period. Yeah. Sometimes that can be up to 3 months.
It usually is with tax professionals that we're finding it is 3 months.
Yeah. Then, so once you've done the process of recruiting and they've signed, you've got another 3 months to wait. So you really want to get that first part done as quickly as you can. Being in a kind of youngish tech company, we've taken that quite seriously. Like, we are recruiting and expanding quite rapidly. So we don't try to hang around on the recruitment process if we can help it. So I kind of took in the candidate applications and took a more active role. Instead of sort of leaving it to HR, I took a more of an active role to look for the type of person that I was really looking for, because I think when you see someone's skills and experience, you can quite quickly tell if they will be suitable and a good fit. So we went through that process. And I think the question you asked me was, what am I looking for from a candidate?
Just out of interest, how many applications did you get?
For a tax manager, I've got about 1,300 to 1,400 applications.
And you went through all of them?
Yeah. Some of them were quickly discarded. I mean, it's a funny one, and I did a lot of thinking about this. You advertise for a tax manager role, and sometimes someone with no experience in even tax applies.
Yeah.
And I kind of, philosophized about it and thought, is this because there's such a desperation amongst some candidates for a role? Or is it genuine belief that they could transition from, sometimes not even accounting, they can transition from project management into tax or something. So is there like a naivety amongst candidates? I don't really have a firm answer, and I'm sure you guys have thought about it as well.
We get that all the time, but that's why we're paid to do our jobs. We have to filter out these candidates and really find the skill set that the client's looking for, which saves a lot of time. But it's nice in this scenario that you were willing to put the time in, because it's the first time you went into a head of tax role and you really wanted to find the right candidate for yourself. So not everybody has the luxury of time, or HR might have multiple roles that they're working on, and tax might be a new role for them. So it's easier just to outsource this to a specialized recruiter like ourselves. But definitely we have to do a lot of this filtering. And
that is what it is. And, I wouldn't want to say to anyone, like, don't chase your dreams. If you are working in audit and you want to work in tax, like, you should absolutely go for it. But some degree of realism in you can't be a tax manager if you've never done tax. Okay, but you can be a tax intern, or you can be a tax associate, and to get moving up that ladder of experience. So the first thing I would see in recruiting is probably someone's LinkedIn bio. And then the second thing I would see would be their CV. So the filtering part I would probably do on the LinkedIn bio. So my advice would be to make sure your LinkedIn is looking presentable, it's accurate, it's got what you want it to have on it, whether that's in the snapshot bio, you want to say something about yourself, or whether it's in the experience of your employers or certain skills or qualifications that you have. Make sure that's on
I checked
LinkedIn.
yours yesterday.
Thanks. Cheers.
Yeah, it's a good profile.
And don't overdo it on LinkedIn. I think there's a habit developing to kind of overdo it, especially in the title bar of your profile, about X this, X that, X this, and like, well, I don't know how I feel about that. I think there can be a pride. Ex McKinsey or ex Uber is clearly you have a certain pride about that, but it is X, and it's in your experience anyway. So maybe be more forward thinking in your title on LinkedIn in terms of what you are as a person or what you want to be. Or tax manager, tax director, tax assistant manager, just make it just simple. So that's the first thing I see. And, being overzealous on your LinkedIn can kind of put a hiring manager off sometimes. And then CV wise, I mean, I've looked at so many CVs in my life, and they've made me question my own CV occasionally, and challenge me on how does my CV come across. But if you, and I know you will feel the same way. I've seen some shocking CVs, and I've seen some very, very good, very well presented CVs, and there is tons of information out there on how to do a good CV. There's tons of science and psychology on how to do a good CV. Many senior people will be able to look at someone's CV and know within 10 seconds, maybe even 5 seconds, if they're going to hire that person. And I hope, and I'm sure to a large extent, that that's not about unconscious bias. That's about the presentation of the CV, the font even. So if you feel that that's not your niche of doing things in a way that's stylish or clear, get help with your CV. Go to a CV writer or service, or ask your friends or ask your colleagues to give you kind of genuine constructive feedback on your CV, and really try to get that popping, because if it's 5 pages, no. If it's half a page, no. If it's got spelling mistakes, grammar mistakes, no. I really look for a well-presented CV in all of those areas, because that translates into how they present themselves at work.
Exactly.
How is their written emails, letters, presentations can all be kind of linked back to how their CV is presented. Because if you've spent 3 weeks working on your CV, and it's not good, then you could spend an hour on a letter and it would definitely not be good. So it sounds harsh, but I think it's common sense.
I know.
What do you think about CVs?
No, I agree. But if a CV comes to us, when we share the CVs with our clients, they are formatted internally. But I have to double check, that everything that I want the candidate to have on their CV is stated. There are cases where they have their current roles listed, but there's just the title of their previous roles. But we need to understand what you did in your previous roles as well, or just titles.
And is that a kind of filter for unconscious bias, like to format them all the same, so that it's more about the experience than about the presentation?
Someone can pay someone to write a CV for them.
True.
Usually if we're sending a candidate, we don't send hundreds of CVs, we send 5. And we've done the filtering process.
Well, you'll have had a conversation with that person.
Exactly.
So that's really where you're informed about their capabilities.
I'm not, to be honest, me personally, I'm not too fussed about the CV, because the client has come to us for a reason. They trust our opinion or trust our choices of candidates that we're sending across. So I wouldn't put a candidate forward for a process that I don't genuinely think would be suitable for the role, and I'm comfortable putting that candidate in front of my client. So I'm not overly fussed about the CV. It's not
you're definitely adding that value. And that's clear, I think. I think when a candidate's applying directly, like, this is something to think about. But you're absolutely right. I mean, you've pre-interviewed the people that you're putting forward.
Saying that, I can't put a CV forward which is shockingly bad, because then my client's going to say, how can you send this to me? I trust that the candidates I put forward would have a good CV. But we format it, I guess, we have certain information that we put across, admin details on all our CVs. And just to keep everything, the same.
Level playing field.
Exactly. There's no, this colour stood out on this CV rather than this one, or the photo. We take all photos out, by the way. We have details such as date of birth, their gender, marital status, which is all common to put on a CV in the UAE, in this part of the world. But photos we don't have. If the client wants to see what the candidate looks like, they can have a look on LinkedIn themselves.
And don't put your home address and your phone number.
No, we take that out.
I see that often.
People know you say, no, I think that's quite common, having a phone number. Yeah.
A phone, well, of course, an email or a phone number.
Yeah.
But your home address is a bit.
Oh, yeah, it's a bit
much.
personal. Okay, good. So you went through 1,300 applications, and how did you narrow it down? And then once you narrowed it down, what was the interview process like?
So I think making that process quick, as I said before, is important so that you can not lose the good ones, by taking too long. Like I said, I narrowed it down based on specialism. What area of tax had they been working in? I was particularly looking for someone who had a VAT background, but who was, a chartered accountant by qualification, so that they could develop from pure VAT into more of a rounded group tax person. Okay. So taking on direct taxes, tax risks, tax reporting, even potentially M&A and structuring and things like that. So I wanted someone who had the skills in terms of education and the experience of VAT.
Okay.
So that's really where my filter was going, and I filtered it down to, 10 or 15 people, and then slept on it, and then went back to the same 10 or 15 and looked at them again and sort of challenged myself a bit more, and filtered it down again to maybe 5. And then I passed that back to the HR team to go and have an initial call with each of them.
Okay.
And so any kind of bias or motivations I had in choosing those 5 were kind of taken away by giving it to HR to then do their chats. Mm-hmm. So HR came back and said, look, all five are good.
Okay.
So I had to either decide to interview all 5 or narrow it down again. I think I ended up interviewing 3. Mm-hmm. And I think in the first interviews, it's, if I had a team of 10 people, that first interview can go really well, it can go averagely, it doesn't really matter. That person will be interviewed by more people and you will get a feeling. But because I was recruiting the first person, you feel very quickly if you click. And if it's just 2 of you, you have to click. Yeah. You have to be able to work well together and know that, whether you trust that person or you can see yourself leaving that person effectively in charge while you are on holiday or if you're off for some time. Having been in the business, who the characters are that you deal with, the CEO or the CFO or the legal counsel or whoever it is. You have to imagine, okay, can I let that person go and give a presentation to the CFO? Do I feel that this is the type of person that I'm interviewing? And so you think about these things as you interview, and for me it was quite clear, quite quick. We chose someone, and again keep going back to it, but we moved quickly, and tried to show that kind of best practice in recruiting of moving quickly, being transparent, letting them know what's happening.
It says a lot about a company when things are moving quickly, which it's not always the case. Yeah.
And then for the ones who had, obviously we can't give a personal reply to 1,300. Yeah. But for the ones who made it to a next stage, we try to give a personal response. And sometimes that's very difficult because there's no particular reason. Everyone's a good candidate to some extent, but just there was another candidate who felt like a better fit. Is sometimes just honesty is the best policy, right? Yeah. There's nothing you did, so we just moved along with that, and that was that. So quite a good process. Okay. But sometimes that doesn't happen. We have other roles that we've tried to fill in the wider finance team outside of tax, where that internal process hasn't worked, and we've had to find someone more specialised, like yourself, to go out there and really dig a bit deeper for the right candidate. Yeah. And I can see that happening in the future for me. I'm sure it will happen. The market for jobs is interesting at the moment. There's a huge demand for accounting and tax jobs. Like we've spoken about that before. And there's also a huge pool of candidates looking for jobs. 1,300 applications, you know, for almost every job that goes live. But for some reason, you know, there's still a bit of a disconnect, you know, whether candidates aren't bringing to the table what employers are looking for, or whether employers are just being too selective. They're saying, I only want a Big Four qualified person. And my question to them would be, why? Why do you only want a Big Four qualified person? Just because every other job profile has said it before. I don't believe in that. That you'd have to be Big Four trained to have a good job. So maybe there's some movement to be done on both the employer and the candidates side to kind of join up this mismatch between tons of candidates and tons of jobs.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because I am actually recruiting a role right now. It's not a tax role, and the requirements were somebody from the Big Four. And I have presented candidates from the Big Four, but then this candidate just, you know, added me on LinkedIn. I accepted them, and I looked at their profile and I thought, you've done exactly what my client wants, but you don't have Big Four. But I'm just going to add you in anyway and see what happens. There's no harm. And I know that you've done the right, you know, work previously. And that candidate is now the preferred candidate in the interview process. And it's because the client trusted, you know, me when I said, I think you should just meet with him. And yesterday I had a call with the client, and they thanked me, saying, thank you for pushing us on meeting him. He actually is spot on. So definitely I think clients should be a bit more open-minded. Don't just say you want X, Y, Z when there could be a perfect candidate out there that, you know, you weren't expecting. Yeah,
I think the world's changing to some extent on that sort of stuff, and just saying various things because that's what's always been said. I think as well, I've seen often over the years is employers being too optimistic in terms of years of experience, or, you know, looking for a manager who's got 15 years of experience. Well, I mean, that person's a director or a head of tax if you have 15 years. You have to be realistic. And sometimes, you know, it just comes down to the candidate, right? Because sometimes you've got someone who might have just 4 years experience, but they're just extremely good. And you'd be a fool to pass them by just because you want 7 years experience.
Well, this ties in quite nicely with, you know, understanding why you think you got the role at DeBizzle when you'd come from DP world, because usually when clients come to us, they want somebody from the same industry, kind of like a plug and play candidate, somebody who knows inside out all about the industry. So why do you think you got the role at DeBizzle? I know you've got the likability factor.
Thanks.
But yeah, technology, it's a new industry for you.
So I think in tax, 80% of it doesn't matter about the industry. And someone's probably listening to this or watching this and thinking like he's so wrong. But I think, let me explain what I mean is, when you build a tax team and you have a tax function, like many of the things are common to any industry. There's tax reporting to your accounting guys. There is tax compliance, tax returns and paying tax. There is tax audits in different countries, which we kind of put under the umbrella of tax risks. And there's tax planning, structuring, M&A activity, buying and selling assets or businesses. That's all common stuff. So the baseline knowledge translates, I think, across industries, unless you get into something very niche like fintech or, you know, something, one of these more emerging industries. So for me, that move to DeBizzle, I don't think moving from a very industrial focused business to a technology business was a big deal to them. It was more about whether they thought I could quickly get up to speed with what they do and how they do it and how they make money. Because ultimately that's how do you understand a business? You understand what it sells or what it provides. How does its revenue come in? Do people buy things in shops? Do people take a subscription? Do you sell business to business? Do you sell packages? Do you sell one-off? Do you sell annual contracts? If you can just understand quickly how the revenue comes in and how the costs happen and where they happen, then you understand the business as an accountant, I think. So that was the 20% for me, was just getting in the door, understanding who does what we do, where we do it. And my eyes were opened because all I knew was Butte and Dubizzle in the UAE. I didn't really know until I dug a little deeper into the businesses that we have across the GCC and the subcontinent. And I sort of quickly, although I think everyone has an interest in tech these days, so I did have a reasonable interest in my spare time in tech, but getting into the business side of tech and learning about user numbers and page views and how long someone spends on each page on our site and how they interact with our site, like learning all that stuff was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And I think if you're a person who's interested to learn in what you're doing, and the more you learn about what you're doing, the better I think you are at it.
Yeah.
If you're that type of person, then changing industry shouldn't be a problem.
Good. So you heard it here first.
Yeah.
Those companies out there who are looking to hire a tax professional, industry doesn't matter.
Yeah, with caveats.
No. Okay, great. So with Dubizzle being a tech company, and from our previous conversations, I know you are already using tax technology within the business, which is not so common in this part of the world. So maybe you can share, some insights into the benefits you're experiencing using tax technology.
Yep. Yeah, I think, tax technology is the current, it's not a buzzword, it's buzzwords, but is the buzzwords of the tax community right now. And that's not just in the UAE, that's probably globally. I think all the big four, all the kind of software as a service providers are really buzzing about tax technology. And the reason for that is I think we've reached a kind of critical stage where the finance function technology has really developed in the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. We've gone from kind of very old, let's say SAP or Hyperion type ERP systems to more advanced systems like Oracle, for example, where you're not just talking about a financial reporting system, you're talking about a full finance system covering financial reporting, management accounting, tax, budgeting, HR, headcount, salaries, the whole lot is all in one cube or sphere, if you will. Mm-hmm. And all that data is in there, and all that data is just continually growing. And if you can kind of harness that data and manipulate it, you can use it for anything you need to use it for. So it can be a decision about the business, about the strategy of the business. What's the trend of my revenue growth in Saudi? And if the kind of analysis you do on that says good things, you might put more resources into Saudi to grow the business. Well, the same can be said of tax. You suddenly have access to all of your financial data. You don't have to go and email the financial controller and ask for a spreadsheet, send me the trial balance for this company and blah, blah, blah. It's all in a cloud, if you will. And by harnessing some form of tax technology, you can grab that data very quickly, manipulate it automatically, and use it for whatever tax purposes you have. And why is that important from an in-house tax person's point of view? It's efficiency and speed. Mm-hmm. You can complete your reporting in January, for year end. You can complete it in a few days instead of a few weeks. You can produce your tax return for any entity, maybe almost automatically, mm-hmm. maybe 70% automatically, and just do the finishing touches and submit it. Instead of what would previously happen, you waited for the financial statements to be finished, you got a set of them, you opened up your tax computation spreadsheet or software and you started plugging in numbers and manually doing a bit of analysis and then scanning it and saving it so you've got a record of what you've done and then posting it off to the tax authority. All of that can be done now in a matter of hours. So the technology efficiencies for in-house guys and girls can be fantastic. But you have to also remember that the tax authorities are getting smarter.
Yep.
So with UAE corporate tax now in force, and with VAT having been in force for 7 years, 2017, 2018, where did the time go? I don't know. So with that's all digital. We're submitting digitally. Now, I have the full kind of filing system for UAE corporate tax has not been unveiled yet, but I have no doubts that it will be electronic. You will submit your accounts electronically. You will submit your tax return and your tax computation electronically. You might be submitting some kind of metadata electronically. And the tax authority, will have that info in a similar way that you have in-house in your tax technology reporting system. So they'll be able to also manipulate that data, benchmark that data, compare you, I say like cut and shut that data in different ways and different mechanisms to understand you as a taxpayer and to identify anomalies in what your data says about your business. So we should be conscious of that if we're not using tax technology, they will be. And that will could put you like behind the curve.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you asked me 6 months ago, I don't think people were ready for tax technology. And when I was asking, my tax network, they said we're not quite there yet. But in the last week or so, I've heard it. The buzzword has started to come to light. Tax technology is we're getting ready for it now.
I think because maybe people, it's not just a thing, tax technology. It's a whole spectrum of applications or support that you can put in your business. And as I said, a lot of finance functions have gone through that transformation from a manual paper-based or Excel-based finance function to using a more joined-up ERP. And very often the jump to add tax to that ERP is very small. And sometimes even the software provider provides tax for free. You don't have to pay like an extra license. You can just add the tax module. And as long as you implement it in the right way and you understand how it works, then, hey presto, you have both a finance ERP that's functioning and now you have the tax add-on that leverages the data in the finance ERP. So I think people have kind of switched on to that a lot recently. But look, tax technology doesn't have to be about, expensive licenses or expensive implementation. It's just about, realizing what's available to us now in our phones and our computers and various software online providers, and thinking, okay, what are the parts of the tax function that are slow and boring and manual and monotonous, and how can I use whatever technology is out there to kind of make that a faster, more enjoyable process.
Definitely. We're living in a digital world, so we're going to have to get up to speed with tax technology sooner or later. So, okay, great. Thank you for sharing.
We still love Excel, though.
No, we still love Excel. Okay, cool. So I think that kind of wraps up what I wanted to go through in terms of your career journey and what's happening internally at Debizzle in terms of how you do things. So, yeah, I just wanted to ask you a few non-tax questions, if I can. So what do you love most about Dubai?
Oh. Actually, I was thinking about this morning driving here, and what I love about Dubai is that even after 10 years, like, you can still just suddenly be in a part of the city and be like, wow, this is insane.
Yeah, it's constantly changing.
We're used to it, right? Yeah. We've been here for some time and we're just kind of used to the city. And, you see the Burj Khalifa and you're like, oh, yeah, it's the Burj Khalifa. Yeah. You might not even say anything because it's just there. But like the other day I had coffee with an advisor in DIFC, and I was just sitting in the coffee shop just sort of looking up, and looking around me and just thinking like, wow, this is insane. And Dubai, I think what I love about Dubai is that continually happens. It can be in a very new part of Dubai with a very amazing building, or it can be in a beautiful park that they've built and made for everyone to enjoy, or even it can be in the old part of Dubai by the creek, and you can just sit there and just be like, wow.
Yeah, you can never be bored in Dubai.
Yeah. So I like that. I like I like the weather. I like the lifestyle.
Yeah.
I like the people that I've met.
Yeah.
It's a very diverse, multicultural city.
Yeah.
Even my daughter comes home from school and says, I was working today with so-and-so and so-and-so, and these names are just interesting names, right? And I'm like, where's she from? Where's he from? Because, and everyone's from somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's really exciting.
It's cool.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. If you weren't a tax professional, what would you be?
Oh, I don't know. When I was a teenager, I really wanted to be a pilot.
Okay, cool.
I wanted to be a pilot for British Airways.
Nice.
I even looked into it. I looked into the scholarship program that they offered and what the entry requirements were. And I think at the time I think I'd read somewhere that they had 15,000 applications a year and they only took 200. And I thought, it's not going to happen. So I ditched that and I became an accountant and I became a tax professional. So I guess I would like to be a pilot.
Okay.
But I like to cook as well, so maybe I'd like to be a chef.
Oh, what kind of food do you like to cook?
Actually everything. I think I gravitate towards like Italian and French kind of European cooking.
Yeah.
But I've been dabbling in Asian stuff. It's a whole different ball game, like cooking Asian food compared to cooking European food. But it's exciting, and there's lots of exciting ingredients and stuff.
Yeah.
So I still kind of have a little passion for cooking and a passion for aviation, as I'm busy doing my tax.
Maybe a role for Emirates, not British Airways anymore.
Emirates catering, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Combine the both. Okay, great. So thank you so much for coming on our tax podcast. I hope the listeners found this useful, interesting, and they're ready for their interviews, their in-house interviews now. I've got a small gift from the Alchemy team as a small thank you.
Wow.
It's our famous hampers. So I'm just going to get up and give this to you.
I'm going to try and not move the microphone too much. Thank you very much. Wow. Oh, sorry, thank you.
Enjoy.
Wow. That's beautiful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for the discussion. I enjoyed it.
Good.
I didn't get to ask you many questions about you,
That's
but
okay.